we're now joined on the couch by one of our academic advisors, Dr. Roni Reiter-Palmon, who is an expert in creativity. And you learned me my first lesson on this project when, of course, we set out to study collaboration and creativity. And I thought creativity was just something you knew when you saw it.
What do they mean they studied creativity and they said they were more creative in the room?
Right.
Whatever.
You measure that. But you told me, in fact, there is a definition.
Yep, there is a definition and we can measure it.
Yeah. So what is it?
So really, for those of us that study creativity, we agreed amongst ourselves that creativity is an idea or a solution, a product. It could also be a process, a new process you're introducing that has two components. It needs to be new. It needs to be original or novel. And that's typically what we think about when we think about creativity. But it also needs to be useful or appropriate or solve a particular problem or be something that consumers want. Otherwise, it's just, why would companies invest in something just because it's new? So when we look at creativity and we have originality or newness without usefulness, a lot of times it's something we can't implement.
Mm-hmm.
And the organization can't use. If we have something that's useful or appropriate, but it's not original, then we have a routine solution. It's something that we do time and time again. Again, it's not creative. We really need to have both components exist in order for something to be creative.
And we can measure that.
We can measure that.
And we put some guidelines.
Absolutely. So the gold standard for measuring creativity comes from Teresa Amabile, who was at Harvard, retired recently, in their School of Business. And she said, you know what? Experts, because they know the domain so well, can recognize when something is new and novel because they've seen a lot of these. But they also know when it's high quality or appropriate or useful. And over the years, we've devised these metrics that you see in front of you to define what being novel or original is. It includes things like, is it new? Do we see a lot of these? By definition, creativity can't be something that everybody can think of right at the drop of the hat. Is it really structured or limited by the challenge that is presented, or is it going beyond? Is it imaginative? Sometimes humorous, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we can define quality by, is it complete? Does it address multiple issues raised by the challenge that you're facing? Is it effective? Does it actually solve the problem? Can we implement it? Is it feasible? Is it practical? Is it appropriate? And then we can score solutions. And we've been doing this for many years. I've been doing this for close to 40 years, scoring using these guidelines. And that's how we do research on creativity.
Yeah. I mean, I had no idea. You knew this, I think.
Well, a little bit, but I mean, when we got working on this project and just, in general, we're going to show you what came back from the experiment and how creative it was and or wasn't. But one of the things I was disabused of was this idea that we want sort of the novel idea from outside, the naive perspective that unveils something that the expert in trainment would never have found. And you helped me unlearn that. Yeah. That and I think that's like a superhero magic genie kind of moment when a novice comes up with something cool, but it is so vanishingly rare compared to expert creativity.
Correct, because what novices do is they come up with solutions that are not novel. Partly because they don't know what's been done in a field.
Right.
Partly because they focus on the quick, immediate, low-hanging fruit, which have been done to death.
Right.
So we need some degree of expertise. Now, we don't necessarily need the most expertise, right? So, and what we're really seeing is that sometimes it's the combination of multiple expertise that results in these creative ideas. But if you're a complete novice, you just wouldn't know what to do and where to start.
So we're looking at these were the metrics that we were using to score the solutions. If you participated in the experiment, this might look familiar to you. In the chat, I think we've got the commercial building briefing. Yes.
It looks like we got kicked off, and apparently not.
Okay,
Okay.
Okay.
We're still back on. We thought
We're still
maybe we
back
got
on.
kicked off the
Yay.
Zoom, but we're still here.
that's good. And just like in this moment, we are highly interruptible. So, we're going to talk through what we saw from a creativity perspective. And if things come up for you, questions and whatnot, you are welcome to unmute, ding in, ask us a question.
Like's happening right now.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll turn the camera around where you can see what it is that we're looking at here in terms of the setup. But what you're looking at on the screen right now is the briefing. We thought in order to come up with creative solutions for our empty or vacant building problem, we needed a briefing. And that if we were able to brief the experiment participants well enough with enough detail and to turn them into, well, not experts, not even pseudo experts, but if we were to give participants some information on a little bit of what's done before, a little bit of what a good solution might look like, we will get better. We'll get more creative solutions. So we developed this briefing. We consulted with Ryan Anderson from Miller Knoll, whose colleague you just heard from in the previous presentation. We also had, as part of the briefing, not just what would you do with this empty building, but what would you do with it to solve one of the world's big problems? And we listed what some big problems. We had Lisa draw what some of these problems are. So what we were priming. We were priming people. We were trying to turn them into experts to give them a little bit of a leg up. And what we got, so we ran the experiment 10 times, 9 times. And what we found was we were getting the same result. This is a Midjourney created result of some of the descriptions of some of the responses to our prompt. And they were homogeneous. They were multi-use buildings. They had gardens, solar panels, there was retail, but they were all around, most of them were around solving the homelessness problem, re-educated, addressing mental wellness communities. And so we said, we came back to Roni and the advisors and we said, we think we're priming people into this pattern of response. So can we change the prompt? And yeah, after discussion, we did. So we removed the solve big problem part of the prompt and changed some of the wording to get more, well, we wanted to change the sentiment more positive. We felt like a lot of these responses were coming in and they were negative in terms of their tone. So we changed the prompt. So what are the coolest, most exciting uses for these empty spaces? So let's set the stage here and look at what was done. The numbers. We talked about the numbers in an earlier session, but we ended up running 25 experiments. In those 25 experiments, we had a total of 185 individuals. And in aggregate, there was an individual brainstorm in the experiment. And in those individual brainstorms, those 185 participants came up with roughly 1,400 Post-it notes, individual ideas. And then we broke those participants into teams, 71 to be exact. So we ended up getting 71 responses to the prompt. What do we do with these vacant buildings? And we found that, well, 91% of them were similar. They were of a certain kind. We were still getting that multi-use building.
The ziggurat of sustainability
that
will solve all of our problems. Yep.
And of all of these, we found that 6, maybe 1 or 2 more were what we would consider, well, objectively different from those other 65 or so. We transcribed the presentations. We put the descriptions of those concepts into a word cloud, and this is what we got. it was, there were buildings, there were spaces used for the community. We were going to be housing the homeless. You can go and you could take classes. There was going to be a cafe. You could do goat yoga.
I think goat yoga only showed up a couple times. There was a little bit more novelty in the detail. Yeah.
So as an example, this was a briefing that we got from in person. Food is Life Center. So there were differences in these of a certain kind concepts, but they were superficial.
Yeah, but I mean, and I wanted to show this one also just to make it clear and to be fair, this wasn't a lot of time.
It was
right. These are people who are thrown together, asked to solve this massive problem and come up with a creative, wonderful, high quality solution in like 15 minutes, working with maybe somebody they've just met for the first time who they know as Pepper Pig. So the proposals are not deep, nor should we expect them to be. This particular one was novel because while it was a homeless and food and multi-use center, they incorporated livestock. So there was only one that incorporated livestock. So when we did the rendering in Midjourney, if you go to we've got sheep under the solar panels, and I kind of like that.
But we still have we've got there's farming going on, rooftop farming. We've got a cafe, so there's retail, there's B2C, there's B2B. In the back, there's a brick building where people are taking classes. So still this multi-use. It's themed around food. I think there's even a startup accelerator. All the same spaces.
So this is one of my favorite quotes. So as Dave and Elise came back and said, what we really noticed was framing the problem is something we haven't thought about, but it's playing a huge role. And when we talked about this, I went to this quote from Einstein, which says the formulation of the problem is often more essential than its solution, which may be merely a matter of skill, which suggests that really how we frame the problem and how we think about it up front is setting the path that we go on in terms of solving it. Which is what we see when we look at different theoretical models of creative problem solving. And they all start with defining, framing, constructing the problem. And then we go into additional parts of it, like looking for additional information, generating solutions, evaluating those solutions, choosing the one that you're going to implement, and then actually implementing it. But it all starts with how you frame the problem. And the reason the framing becomes so important is because problems in business or community problems, world problems, are what we call ill-defined. And ill-defined problems have a number of characteristics, such as they can be viewed in multiple ways. There are multiple domains of expertise that play a role. They have multiple possible solutions. So a well-defined problem in comparison is something like 2 + 2. When we say 2 + 2, there's only one answer. It's 4. If you say anything else, you're wrong. It's not creative, right? But when it's an ill-defined problem that has multiple ways to be viewed, has multiple causes, it also can have multiple solutions. And some of those solutions are better than others. Some are higher quality or more effective than others, and some are more novel than others. And that's where the creativity can come in.
So, and I saw in the chat, Shelley's like, well, maybe this is why we do as many ideas as we do. And I would love to be able to say that people in the version of the experiment that had the greater volume of upfront ideas came to more unique final proposals, because they had more time, they had the scratchy slap effect of volume, and you would hope that getting all of those out would weed out the things that were boring, but that isn't quite what happened. Actually, we found no real difference in the kind of final proposals we got at the end of the experiment. Again, very short time. But it gave us a chance to really think about this question of framing, right? And thinking about our buildings and our unused buildings, and how the way we look at the topic is akin to how people on different floors of a building are looking through different windows. And as they look through each window, they see reality in a slightly different way. So after the experiment, as we've been talking about that, we've developed a model that helps us sort of explore the different kinds of frames people adopt. And we want to share some examples of proposals that came through where the question hadn't changed, the process hadn't changed, but the person themselves brought a different frame into the conversation and gave us a more novel answer. So if you haven't seen this, we'll invite you to check this out at a later time. But this is basically a shape, a tesseract shape that we use to explore the different kinds of framing. The first one right there in the middle, if the circle is our topic, is our line of sentiment. So from positive to negative. So if we go forward, that's what we tried to shift with the proposal, right? We went from solve the world's biggest problems to build something cool.
Right.
We're like, please make it fun. You're
Bummed out here. Listening to these presentations.
so bummed. Well, and as somebody told me afterwards, they're like, boy, all of these examples of inner city housing, like the projects weren't great the first time. So, let's try something new. Our reframe didn't help. But people brought their own frames. So we did have one group based in Portland that came up with an idea of an indoor 365 days a week picnic. Do you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, I mean, this one has stuck with me ever since I heard it, because I don't know if it was the first, like, oh, that's different. But the big picture here, as Midjourney presents it, the idea is that you would go to this space and you would have your option to go picnic in Central Park or in Wonderland of Alice in Wonderland, or maybe the Tuileries in Paris. There would be food trucks in the parking lot, and you could get your food, and then you can go and you can picnic. And I think here we've got an example of a different theme. So, you pick your theme, you pick your spot, and you go in. And that was one of the first ones we heard that was a real departure from that multi-use building.
Mm-hmm.
It was singular in focus, and it was in intent, I think, than a lot of the other solutions that we've been hearing at the time.
Right, but it had community, it had bringing people together, it had a business model, and it looked like fun.
And it looked like fun. In terms of the framing, this came from a group in Portland.
Yeah,
and
where it rains a lot.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me was, there's this internal framing that's going on here, versus maybe someone who lives in Austin where it's sunny 340 days of the year. They're not necessarily looking for a place to go and picnic indoors, because they can do it outside.
Now, the other thing we noticed with that particular group is that was a group of design thinkers.
Yes.
So there were some multi-use community buildings in their submissions, but they had more unique characteristics. So while these were not necessarily experts in what to do with housing, they were creativity experts. Mm-hmm. And that made a difference in what we saw in the final results. So do you have data on that?
Actually, yes. What we find is that when we train people first of all, we can train creativity, which, if you're studying creativity and you want people to be more creative, that's really cool. Mm-hmm. But the biggest bang for the buck comes from training them in these models of how to think creatively. So I'm not surprised that people that know how to think creatively actually can put it into practice.
Right. Yeah.
Even though they weren't real estate developer
experts,
right?
Right.
Okay.
And just to be clear, in case anybody is like, wait a second, why are they dissing on having green housing? We're not. We're just saying it wasn't a unique proposal in the set of data when we were looking to judge creativity. So some other reframing that came from the audience, and I just want to double check and see if there's. So So we tried to go from a negative problem orientation to a possibility. What could we do with it's cool? What we found was interesting is when people themselves thought about the problem or thought about the question, not from who has the problem that needs to be solved, but from another stakeholder's perspective. So I think this first example actually.
So the D4 League of Innovation, this was essentially a, if you were to take like a startup accelerator and combine it with a tournament bracket. The idea was that, and I suppose Shark Tank, for those of you who know the Shark Tank, where you'd be pitching and you'd pitch in a head-to-head battle with another startup, and you'd get selected and you'd go to the next round. And this particular idea came from, I think it was a team of two. They did not know each other prior to this. They came out, I remember them coming out of the breakout room, and it just seemed like they had made a connection and become fast friends in a matter of 40 minutes. But their backgrounds, they had startups in their backgrounds. They were entrepreneurs. They were in the world of, both were in the world of software. And so it was unique and it was surprising to us because of the departure from the norm that we had seen. But then when we looked at it through the lens of who actually came up with the idea, it actually made a lot of sense.
And what we find is that really the way we frame problems tends to track with that. It is based on our education. I'm a psychologist. Everything to me is a people issue, right? I think about it from a psychological perspective, not necessarily, not like a computer scientist or a biologist or a medical professional because of my training. Our past experiences with similar kinds of problems shape how we think about problems when we see them, we encounter a novel one. So again, this is something that we see in the literature. It's something that is validated in research, that we tend to make these very personal to us. And in some cases, the way to break that personal connection, part of it is bringing other people in that have a different perspective, but also even just telling people, think about it from different perspectives. Don't just take your own perspective into account.
Right. Right. So that opportunity to intentionally step into a different stakeholder perspective, or like one of the creativity activities we played with before the design competition, because neither Dave nor I designed these experiments, was counterfactual thinking. Like, how would you design this building if you were a colony of bats? Or just things that are just wildly outside of your own viewpoint to help really flip that frame. But we didn't get that.
We got the D4 League of Innovation,
which is cool. It's like
Very.
battle bots for
I was thinking
software
throw
guys.
into that Venn diagram with like a tournament, the Coliseum, the Roman Coliseum.
There you go.
We're going head to head.
That sounds brutal.
Yeah. Well, we've got the stands here, right? It kind of looks like the Coliseum.
Also on the front of technological and potentially brutal, but probably not, we had one group that heard cool and exciting and was very concerned about the retrofit cost for these old buildings and for the operational model that allows them to use an empty space, convert it very quickly, and turn a profit. So their proposal was an augmented reality space. And the plan was to strip the building and basically pad it and paint it cool and then give everybody VR headsets and maybe some harnesses so that they could connect. And as they started to explore the idea, you could hear them talking about taking the local elementary schools through a field trip through coral reefs using virtual reality, or helping local EMT groups or firefighters first responders do their emergency training in this virtual reality landscape. So even though the frame was very much about the building's financial model, they actually started addressing some of the world's big problems that we outlined in that original briefing.
And that team was business owner?
Business owner.
So
Mhm.
it seemed, going back and looking at the presentation, there was a very strong, there's a high business acumen quotient to the presentation.
Yeah.
Which even though we had asked for what's I think we got explicit even after the turn of the framing, we said works like, and we wanted to prompt the business model more, because in our initial briefing with Ryan and asking like, what does a good solution look like? He said, hey, the first thing that you're going to have to satisfy is that the owner of the building is going to get their money back. But in actuality, there weren't as many detailed business models coming back in the responses. This one actually stood out, and it felt like they had thought.
Like they had a staffing number in this
Yeah.
proposal. Like they had 15 minutes and they had the whole thing.
Right. So again, like the experience was coming in and framing the solution.
Interesting question, Marta. Marta asked if we're all wired to solve big humanity problems. Like that just kind of happens as a side effect if we talk long enough. What do you think?
I'm not sure.
Mhm.
You know, there are people that don't think about anybody but themselves, right? We know some of those, unfortunately. So it's hard for me to imagine them thinking about big humanity problems in a constructive way.
I have to imagine in terms of this group at this event and the people we attracted to these experiments, that would,
Yes,
fewer sociopaths.
yeah, but they do exist. We know that.
Mhm.
So,
Interesting. So you want to talk about this one?
This was the Sharon Ann.
Yeah.
So this was essentially, you look at this, you know what it is, right? This is his daycare spot. You don't need us to tell you that. And so daycare, not necessarily a really creative solution in the grand scheme of things, although it was the only daycare solution we got in our 71 proposals, right? But it met a need. This was something for the staff of university, right?
That's right.
An OSU group, and they were having problems finding daycare, and so they said, well, wouldn't it be great if we could drop our kids off, and our daycare solution or problem would be solved. And I think they were a little self-conscious about it.
They were totally self-conscious about it. And I thought that was one of the things that was kind of fascinating about this, because from the overall cohort, it was the only proposal that looked like this. And yet they were like, well, it's not very creative. It's kind of obvious. And they rated it really low in terms of their self-ratings. But when you step back, you're like, well, actually, nobody else has suggested that. So sometimes the seemingly obvious from your frame may in fact be the missing answer.
But again, they went based on what they were missing, right?
Yeah.
That guided their thinking.
So that creativity, I think in some of our conversations, we were talking about big C, little c, micro c, I don't know, Times New Roman C, Helvetic.
You'll have to walk us through that real quick.
Sure.
That's super useful.
Sure. So we tend to think about creativity when we just throw out the word creativity, we tend to think about what we categorize as big C, the Einstein, the Picasso, the Mozart. And that's important, obviously. But very few of us get there, right? And the specific model that I'm talking about also suggests that we really can't make a judgment about a body of work, which big C is, until after somebody dies.
So that's not an award you want to necessarily worry about striving for.
Correct. At least not during your lifetime, right?
Okay.
So, let's wait with that. Then we have what we call pro C, which is your professional creativity. So we could all be more creative in our professional life. And sometimes those are small incremental changes that lead to a better product, a better outcome, a better process if you're facilitating, solving some disagreement between coworkers. If you're a manager, how do you solve that in a creative fashion? Those are not necessarily major issues. We didn't come up with a theory of relativity, but we did something cool and useful and new.
It feels like that's what Google and Miller Knoll are after for the workplace, right? Like they're, the hot desking and having a place for teams to meet and having a nice couch and everything. None of that's novel, right? But how how we then make it attractive and compelling to a hybrid adapted workforce,
Right.
you know, you're looking for that next level.
Correct.
Yeah.
So those small incremental steps are really important. And frankly, they can lead to that breakthrough.
Mhm.
So, you know, we shouldn't dismiss them. The other two are much more personal. So we talk about little c and mini c. Mini c is sort of internal. So it's creative to you
Right.
and only to you. Little c is a step up from that, where it's creative, but again, it's more personal than the professional creativity, which can be for an entire field. But it's you're putting your stamp on it.
Mhm.
But I think we cannot dismiss the mini c, where, you know, I found something new. Maybe other people have done it before me, but for me, this is new and novel and effective, and we shouldn't dismiss that.
Right. So,
Do they build? Like, can I be big
Yes.
C creative without being little C creative? Do I have to have, do I
Well,
have to actualize individually before?
So think about kids.
Yeah.
They start with mini C and
Yeah, yeah.
progress to little c. We don't ask them to be professionals until they're actually adults, right? So yes, and if you're an adult and you're starting something new, let's say you picked up a new hobby, you will start at that lowest level and you can progress.
So to your point about these little breakthroughs, because I was thinking when we were talking about creativity, it's like, oh, if I'm not coming up with the theory of relativity, why bother?
Right.
Right. Because if definitionally I'm not being creative, but there's an element of self-actualization to it that moves me down this path to bigger.
Right.
And it feels good when I'm creative, or at least when I think I'm creative in my own little world or
Correct.
my team.
Yeah.
There seems to be some bonding that goes on there when you
Absolutely.
feel like you've come up with, even if it's a daycare solution, oh, but it meets our needs in this particular situation.
Yeah.
That feels really good.
Right. And those incremental creative events provide that, you know, businesses look for that. As you said, it's a lot less risky than the big
Mhm.
C creativity or from these major breakthroughs. If we're moving to a whole new approach, you know, it's incredibly risky. If you're making one small step, it's not as risky.
Right.
So businesses are much more likely to approach or look for those incremental steps.
I think that explanation of that model, and I think Robin is talking about something very similar in the chat, like, and Robin, unmute and tell me if I've misinterpreted, because I can't quite see it very well. But, you know, the journey that we take a group on in their creative exploration does not need to be a journey to the most magical cohort-wide creative solution. It needs to be a journey where they go through the process of discovering what works for them. For me personally, I think that's been a really good understanding of why I work on the meeting innovation community rather than workshops for companies most of the time, because the action that needs to happen in most companies really is very little c, right? Like they don't need a wonderfully novel solution to having an effective meeting. They need to, like, you know, decide what they're going to talk about before they invite people.
Have an agenda.
Yeah, it's something, right? You know, it just doesn't need to be that big a deal. So. Okay, so we talked about stakeholders, right? So a lot of what we found that was not the one answer came because people had adopted the perspective of a different, you know, person or company trying to solve the problem. There were a couple of other examples where the frame shift was in scope. So rather than who, but rather more sort of the size. So if you looked at those questions we asked at the beginning, you know, what are some of the coolest, most exciting uses for empty buildings? There were a lot of assumptions folks made. They assumed it was a big building. Yeah, they assumed it was some huge building in an urban core, and that their mission was to design for the entire building, except for one proposal, which designed for the hallway. And in this one, they picked up on this sense of lonely and of the building being lonely So they wanted to fill the building with people. And their proposal was that members of the community would send in pictures, and they would have like an online thing where they say, okay, this week we're doing our pets. And you would send in your pictures. And then if you came there and they happened to have a cafe or something, you would know that that was the week you could go and see your pooch on the wall while you got a coffee. And so the loneliness gets mitigated by surrounding the building and anybody in it with the community outside.
Hallways are a really lonely place. You're not supposed to be in a hallway. You're
But-
supposed to be getting somewhere else, right?
Yeah. But look at all of these imaginary footless people who are enjoying this hallway. I don't know where that lady's legs are, but she's enjoying it. So I thought that was a lovely idea. And then we had one other example where the scope of the question itself was not accepted. So the question was, what is your solution for these buildings? And there were a couple of times where we would pull together groups that included many facilitators who said, my scope in solving this problem is to convene a workshop.
Use the space to figure out what to do with the space.
That's right.
It's a process.
It's a process, not a solution. Mhm.
And again, I think changing the perspective, while it's not a stakeholder, it's still a different perspective, becomes really important. And challenging those assumptions. You know, we all make assumptions when we're trying to solve problems. I've seen it in my own work where people just assume that certain things are required. And when you challenge those assumptions, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I guess we don't need, nobody told us we needed to do that. I just kind of assumed. But that channels your thinking, and you eliminate a whole host of potential solutions because you said, I can't do this.
Right. Right.
So I'm curious, and I see a couple of long comments in the chat, especially of those of you who were in these sessions. What was your recollection of the degree of creativity when you think about, we saw 71 solutions and maybe 6 of them were unique? Is that surprising to you? What questions do you have about creativity? We've got an expert on the couch with us.
Yeah, so if our producer wants to take us off of this mode and put us all in gallery, let's just talk.
Yeah.
If our producer, who is around here somewhere, and folks, feel free to come off mute, turn your cameras on. Let us know. What are you thinking about? Robin.
Hello. I was in one of the events and it was fun. It was imaginary. So for me, then it was like, okay, well, what the heck? Let's just, come up with some ideas, which I think has a super different feel than if it's real in person. This matters, like right now, to this team or this organization or whatever. And so then you have to get really clear about what the problem is, what you're trying to solve for, how creative are you okay to be or not? Those kinds of things are very different than in the imaginary world, but it was really fun.
Thanks. So we talked about that a little bit, like this, in a lot of ways, we felt like what we were seeing was social pressure, right? Like people who don't know each other don't necessarily have a stake in the question, come together. What seems to be the simplest, most acceptable answer?
And there are no real constraints, right? People probably made some assumptions, but the reality is you didn't have a budget, really. You didn't have a timeline, right? Which are 2 basic things you would do in a business setting. Robin's comment about how okay are you with being creative? It's a huge issue in businesses. They say they want creativity, but again, it's risky. It's by definition, if it's new, we didn't try it before, we don't know if it's going to be successful. We might fail. Some organizations, while they pay lip service to creativity, are not okay with a failure.
Right.
And therefore will not take those risky decisions.
How do stakes play into creativity? Because I don't, Robin, correct me if I'm wrong. It sounded like the fact that there were no stakes and that it was made up for you freed you up a little bit. But I also think we got some feedback from people who said, I didn't care as much about this. I really didn't have I didn't bring my A game because there was nothing on the line here.
Yeah.
Is there evidence or research where that comes into play?
Yes, then the answer is that both play a role, right? So being engaged and being motivated is huge. You are not going to be creative if you're not motivated to be creative, first and foremost. So some people are just inherently more motivated. So having this kind of different problem where, it's like, I like being creative. I'm going to be creative regardless. And other people are going to go, well, I don't really care. So I'm not going to. Because being creative also is effortful. It requires some thinking, right? So, not everybody's interested in doing that. But also we find that realistically, when people have to make decisions, there's this really cool study that found that people judged ideas differently if they were told they were in an advisory body or had to make the decision themselves. So if you're just advising to somebody, you're willing to take a little bit more risk because you're not the decision maker. You're just giving advice, and it's their problem if it fails. But if you need to make the decision, all of a sudden we become a lot more conservative and not choose those creative ideas.
I think I saw that as one of the examples in the earlier session about what must remain human, which is the accountability, right? Because when we're talking about AI taking over the world,
right,
maybe we don't want to be in such an advisory role. Maybe we need to be held a little bit more accountable for how that plays out.
I thought I read somewhere, where did it go? I thought I read somewhere that the first 2/3 of creative brainstorming session are mundane. It's not until the end of a session that creativity may emerge.
So there is some truth to that. I don't know that I would say 2/3, but the research does suggest that as human beings, we tend to come up with the more mundane ideas and routine ideas first, because that's what we're familiar with, right? So you tell me to come up with a lot of ideas, I'll throw out a lot of things that I've already seen or know. And then it's like, okay, now I need to think about something new and come up with more creative ideas. So yeah, giving people some more time seems to be helpful. But also telling people to come up with creative ideas up front seems to be just as helpful, right? So if you tell people generate ideas, that's different than generate creative ideas. It's different than structure.
Yeah.
Tiny bit of framing.
Yeah. And you tell them to be creative, and boy, all of a sudden it gets turned on. Because honestly, most of the time we don't get rewarded for being creative. Think about elementary school, high school, even college. Just do as I tell you to do.
Right, do the assignment.
Get it right.
Get it right.
Yeah. So telling people that your expectation is that you will come up with creative ideas shifts something.
So that'll be especially interesting to look at in the data, because one of the memories that's coming back to me now is in some of those sessions where they had 5 minutes, right? We had some people who were they were loving it. Like the ideas kept coming and whatnot. And we had some people who wrote down their ideas, looked around, started talking to the person next to them. We had one lady who wrote down her ideas, looked at it, got up, went to the bathroom, never came back. So there are very individual differences in terms of how you interpret those invitations.
But also, and somebody asked there, so how do you get them to have skin in the game, right? How do you make them motivated is really what the question is.
Yeah.
And it's going to be different for different people, right? What motivates one person, even if you think about it in the most mundane way in terms of, for example, rewarding employees, right? One person might want a pay raise, another person wants a pat on the back and tell me I'm doing a good job, and they're way more motivated by that. Some people want more vacation days. They don't want the pay raise. Give me more vacation days. So you're seeing that in some of the movement towards having different benefits and allowing people to choose and different
Right.
rewards. So you can fit it to the individual person, but that also means that as a manager, as a facilitator, you need to know what that person wants, which requires time.
Let's get to know that.
Yeah.
We've got 5 minutes left here, so if you do have questions, keep bringing them in. I've got one here. You mentioned earlier you can train creativity.
Oh, yeah.
What are some of the things you can do to train creativity?
So a lot of what we know from this model that I showed you guys earlier. So for example, if we think about framing the problem, which is critical, right? Telling people before you come up with a solution, just think about what this problem is. What are your goals?
Mhm.
Think about restating it in different ways. Think about it from different perspectives.
Right.
We've tried all of those. It works like a charm. Even 10 minutes of just thinking about the problem without solving it.
Right.
Don't give me solutions yet. Just think about what the problem is, write it down, and then develop solutions, and they come up with more creative solutions. We do this in teams, and we tell team members, focus on talking to your other teammates about how they view the problem differently.
Mhm.
And find a way to combine all of those differences into a coherent whole instead of ignoring them. And they come up with creative ideas. And that's just one part of it, right? So there are things you could do to facilitate idea generation. There are things you can do to facilitate people actually correctly evaluating ideas, right? So you said a lot of the teams thought that incorrectly judged their ideas, some more creative than they truly were, and some as less. That's also something we could train. So, because if you're not accurately judging the creativity of an idea, you can't pick the most creative idea. You're wrong to begin with.
Yeah, that was something we saw. So in those readings, just for people who don't have the spreadsheet of data in front of them, because it's none of you do. We'll share it if you ask. Do let us know. But of the 25 top rated numerically ideas, one, maybe two of them were not multi-use housing, which makes sense, of course, because the whole cohort is mostly multi-use housing. But Mark was talking. Now, Mark is coming on next. We're going to take a quick break here in a second. But Mark facilitated this, and as a facilitator who does creative work, it was hard.
Yeah, to the point of people just looking and stopping. That's you wouldn't necessarily jump in and tell them what to do, but you could just gently encourage or like show a little bit of possibility beyond going to the bathroom on how you might engage, and then that's sometimes all people need to go, oh, we can talk, and things would happen. But because this was the experiment, a lot of that involvement you had to kind of attenuate. Yeah.
So we're about at break. Mark, it's great to see you because you're up next. So why don't we take, it's going to be at the top of the hour. It'll be 2 p.m. here in Austin. Get up, stretch,
get
hydrate,
some water,
rest your eyes,
blink.
And we're going to come back and we're going to do some creativity activities.
We're gonna get hands-on.
We're going to get hands-on with creativity.
Which is how we train it too.
Hands-on.
Hands-on.
Okay.
Sweet. See you in a bit.
See you in 5.
See you in a bit.